Sometimes the loneliest souls find each other in the most unexpected places. In the frozen wilderness of Oregon Territory, 1887, a young schoolteacher lies dying beneath fallen timber after outlaws destroyed her wagon train. Clara Monroe has made peace with death when she hears boots crunching through the frost. An old mountain man named Jedediah Cross appears through the pines, a man who hasn't spoken to another soul in 20 years. He kneels beside her and offers his hand. "Now come with me," he says quietly. He takes her to his cabin and nurses her back to life. But when the outlaws learn she survived, they come back to silence her forever. Now this aging hermit must become a protector once more. Can a man who ran from the world find the courage to fight for it again? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 days before Jedediah Cross found Clara Monroe half frozen beneath that fallen timber. She'd been sitting in the back of a covered wagon, watching the Oregon landscape roll past like a promise. The morning had been clear and cold, the kind of autumn day that made a person grateful for wool blankets and hot coffee. Clara had been reading a letter from her sister back in Boston, smiling at news of her nephew's first words, when the first gunshot cracked through the air. She remembered dropping the letter, remembered the screaming, remembered the chaos as the 3 wagons in their small train tried desperately to circle, tried to protect the women and children huddled in the centers. But there had been too many of them. 7 men on horseback, faces covered with bandanas, rifles raised, the Kern brothers gang. She hadn't known their name then, but she'd seen the wanted posters later, tucked away in her memory like a nightmare she couldn't quite shake. They'd wanted the strongbox. Everyone knew the 3rd wagon carried something valuable. Military payroll, some said, payment for the new fort being built in Portland. Clara had thought it was just rumor, the kind of talk that made long journeys more interesting. She'd been wrong. The wagon master, a good man named Samuel Wright, who'd fought in the war and carried himself with quiet dignity, had tried to negotiate. Clara could still see him standing there, hands raised, trying to reason with men who'd left reason behind long ago. They shot him first. Then they'd shot his son, who tried to run to him. After that, the killing had been methodical, efficient, cold. Clara had been in the 2nd wagon with 3 other women, a mother and her 2 teenage daughters heading to meet their father in Portland. When the shooting started, the mother had pushed Clara toward the back. "Run," she'd whispered. "When I give the signal, you run for the trees and you don't look back." Clara had shaken her head, terrified, unable to move. But then one of the outlaws had ripped open the canvas cover, and the mother had done something incredibly brave and incredibly foolish. She'd lunged at him, screaming, clawing at his face. In the confusion, Clara had tumbled out the back of the wagon and ran. She'd heard more gunshots behind her. She'd heard the daughters screaming for their mother. She'd heard laughter, cruel, cold laughter that would haunt her dreams for years to come. But she'd done what the mother had told her to do. She'd run into the dense pine forest, and she hadn't looked back. For 3 days, she'd wandered through those woods. She had no supplies, no food, no real sense of direction. She'd drunk from streams, eaten berries she hoped weren't poisonous, and kept moving because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering those screams. On the 3rd day, as the temperature dropped and snow began to fall, Clara had finally stopped running. She'd collapsed beneath a fallen timber, pulled her thin coat tight around her shoulders, and accepted that this was where her story would end. She was 26 years old. She'd survived a factory fire that killed her fiancé, survived the grief that followed, survived the long journey west to start fresh. But she wouldn't survive this. She'd clutched the silver locket around her neck, the one containing photographs of her parents, both gone now, and whispered a prayer she wasn't sure anyone was listening to. Then she'd closed her eyes and waited for the cold to take her. That was when she'd heard the boots. At first, she'd thought it was the outlaws, come to finish what they'd started. She'd been too weak to run, too cold to care. But then she'd heard something else, the gentle snort of a horse, the creak of leather, and a voice. A man's voice, rough from disuse but somehow gentle. "Well now," the voice had said, "what's a young lady doing dying in my woods?" Clara had opened her eyes to find a man kneeling beside her. He was old, she could see that immediately, with a face weathered by years of sun and wind, a thick grey beard, and eyes the colour of steel. He wore buckskins and a heavy coat made of animal pelts, and he carried himself with the kind of stillness that came from spending more time with trees than people. "Please," she'd whispered, though she wasn't sure what she was asking for. Help, mercy, a quick end. The old man had studied her for a long moment, and Clara had seen something shift in those steel-grey eyes. Recognition, maybe, or memory. He'd reached out a calloused hand, rough from work and weather, and touched her forehead gently. "You're burning up," he'd said. "Fever's got hold of you." The others, Clara had managed. "The wagon train." "They're all—" "Hush now," the man had said. "Save your strength. We'll talk when you're warm and fed." He'd stood then, this old mountain man, and Clara had seen how tall he was, how broad across the shoulders despite his age. He'd moved to his horse, a sturdy paint mare who regarded Clara with dark, intelligent eyes, and retrieved a heavy blanket from his saddlebag. "I'm going to lift you now," he'd said, wrapping the blanket around her. "Might hurt some, but it can't be helped." When he'd picked her up, Clara had been struck by how gentle he was, how carefully he cradled her against his chest as though she were something precious rather than a stranger he'd found dying in the woods. She'd tried to stay conscious, tried to remember the path they took. But the fever and exhaustion had pulled her under like dark water. She'd woken briefly during the journey, awareness coming in fragments, the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath them, the old man's steady breathing, the smell of pine and smoke and something cooking. Then darkness again. The cabin, when she finally saw it, would become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. But in that first moment of semi-consciousness, it had seemed like salvation itself, a solid structure of logs and stone, smoke rising from a chimney, windows glowing with firelight against the gathering dusk. The old man had carried her inside and laid her on a bed covered with thick furs. The cabin was warm, heated by a large stone fireplace that dominated one wall. Clara had seen other details through her fever, a table and 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies, dried herbs hanging from the rafters, and above the door a cavalry saber hanging on pegs, its blade dulled with age and rust. "My name's Jedediah," the old man had said, ladling something hot into a wooden bowl. "Jedediah Cross. Most folks used to call me Jed, back when there were folks around to do the calling." He'd helped her sit up, supported her shoulders, and brought the bowl to her lips. The broth had been rich and warm, tasting of venison and wild onions and something else she couldn't identify. She'd managed 3 swallows before her stomach rebelled. "That's all right," Jed had said, setting the bowl aside. "We'll try again in a bit. Right now you need to rest." "Why?" Clara had whispered. "Why what? Why help me? You don't know me." Jed had been quiet for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable in the firelight. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old sorrow. "Because I couldn't help the last ones," he'd said simply. "And because you don't belong to the woods, miss, not yet. Not if I have any say in it." Then he'd pulled the furs up to her chin, added wood to the fire, and settled into a chair by the hearth. Clara had watched him through half-closed eyes, this stranger who'd saved her life, and wondered what kind of man chose to live alone in the wilderness. Far from everything and everyone, she'd wondered what he'd meant about not helping the last ones. She'd wondered about the sorrow she'd heard in his voice, deep and old as the mountains themselves. But most of all, she'd wondered if she'd been saved only to bring danger to this quiet, lonely place, because somewhere out there, beyond the warmth and safety of this cabin, the Kern brothers were still alive. And Clara Monroe was the only person who could identify them, the only witness to their crimes. When they discovered she'd survived, they would come looking, and when they did, this old mountain man who'd shown her such unexpected kindness would be caught in the crossfire of violence he'd obviously spent years trying to escape. As Clara finally drifted into a deeper, Healing sleep, her last conscious thought was a prayer, not for herself this time, but for Jedediah Cross. She prayed that saving her life wouldn't cost him his own. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and wood smoke. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was, and panic seized her chest. Then she heard the quiet movements of someone tending a fire, and memory returned in a rush. The cabin. The mountain man, Jedediah Cross. She opened her eyes to find morning light filtering through small windows, painting everything in shades of gold. The fever had broken during the night, leaving her weak but clear-headed. She could hear Jed moving around the cabin, his footsteps careful and quiet, as though he was trying not to wake her. "I'm awake," Clara said, her voice rough and dry. Jed appeared at her bedside almost immediately, carrying a cup of water. "Drink this slow," he said. "Your body's been through an ordeal." Clara took the cup with trembling hands and sipped carefully. The water was cold and clean, tasting faintly of minerals. It was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. "How long have I been here?" she asked. "2 days," Jed replied. "Fever had you pretty good. You talked some in your sleep. Sounded like you were having troubled dreams." Clara closed her eyes, remembering fragments. She dreamed of the ambush, of running through the trees, of faces she'd never see again. "I'm sorry if I disturbed your peace. Peace is overrated," Jed said, though there was no humor in his voice. "I'll get you some breakfast. Something light. Your stomach needs to ease back into eating." He moved to the fireplace, where a pot hung over the coals. As he worked, Clara took the opportunity to study him more carefully. He was older than she'd first thought, somewhere in his 60s perhaps, but he moved with the efficiency of a much younger man. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of someone who'd spent a lifetime working with them. The cabin itself was sparse but well maintained. Everything had its place. Everything served a purpose. It was the home of a man who'd learned to live with only what he needed, nothing more. Jed returned with a bowl of thin porridge, sweetened with wild honey. He helped her sit up, propping pillows behind her back, and handed her the bowl. Clara ate slowly, feeling strength return with each spoonful. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." "I don't know how I can ever repay—" "Don't need repaying," Jed interrupted. "Just need you to get well enough to tell me what happened out there." Clara set the bowl down, her hands suddenly unsteady. She'd known this conversation was coming, but she wasn't ready for it. Wasn't ready to relive those terrible moments. But Jed's eyes were kind, and she could see he wasn't asking out of idle curiosity. He needed to know, deserved to know what he'd gotten himself into by saving her, so she told him everything. The wagon train heading to Portland, the strongbox everyone whispered about, the ambush that came without warning, the methodical killing, the brave mother who'd given Clara a chance to run. The 3 days lost in the woods. Jed listened without interrupting, his weathered face growing grimmer with each detail. When she described the outlaws, 7 men, well-armed, efficient in their violence, his jaw tightened. "You get a good look at any of them?" he asked. Clara nodded. "One of them, I think he was the leader. He pulled down his bandana at one point. I saw his face clearly." She closed her eyes, bringing back the memory. Hard features, scar running down his left cheek. Eyes like ice. He was the one who shot the wagon master. The one who laughed when she couldn't finish. The memory was too fresh, too raw. "That'd be Cole Kern," Jed said quietly. "Middle brother. Meanest of the 3. Clara looked at him sharply. "You know them?" "Know of them. Anyone who's spent time in this territory knows of the Kern brothers. They've been terrorizing these parts for near on 5 years now. Law can't seem to catch them. They know the country too well, got too many places to hide." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the forest beyond. "You say there was a strongbox?" "That's what people said. Military payroll for the new fort." Jed was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy. "Then they got what they came for. Question is, did they leave any survivors?" "I don't know," Clara whispered. "I ran. I didn't look back. But I heard—" Her voice broke. "I heard screaming. For a long time after I ran, I heard screaming." Jed turned from the window, and Clara saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Anger, cold and controlled, but unmistakable. "You're the witness," he said. Only one who can identify them for certain put them at the scene. Soon as the law finds that wagon train, soon as word gets out there might be a survivor. The Kern brothers are going to come looking. Clara had already thought of this, had lain awake in the darkness considering it. But hearing Jed say it aloud made it terrifyingly real. "I should leave," she said. "I should go as soon as I'm strong enough. I've already put you in danger just by being here." "You're not going anywhere," Jed said firmly. "Not in your condition and not with winter coming on. The pass'll be snowed in within a week, maybe 2. Nobody's going anywhere until spring, but if they come here, then they come here." Jed's voice was calm, matter-of-fact. "And they'll find this old mountain isn't quite as helpless as he looks." Clara stared at him, seeing him clearly for the first time. This wasn't just an old hermit living out his days in solitude. There was steel beneath that weathered exterior. Something hard and capable and potentially dangerous. Her eyes drifted to the cavalry saber hanging above the door. "You were a soldier," she said. "It wasn't a question. Long time ago," Jed replied. "Different man, different life. But you remember. Some things you don't forget." He moved back to the fire, prodding the coals with an iron poker. "Army scout for 15 years. Tracked hostile war parties across 3 territories. Fought in skirmishes most folks never heard about. Saw things." He stopped, shook his head. "Saw enough to know I wanted no more part of that world. Is that why you came up here? To get away from all that?" "Among other reasons." His voice had gone quiet, distant. "But we all carry our history with us, Miss Monroe. Can't outrun it, much as we might try." Clara pulled the teaching certificate from beneath her pillow, where she'd found it that morning, carefully dried and pressed flat. The water stains hadn't entirely ruined it. Her name was still visible, along with the official seal of the Massachusetts Board of Education. "I was supposed to teach school in Portland," she said, running her fingers over the stiff paper. "Fresh start, new life. Leave all the grief and loss behind." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Seems we're not so different, Mr. Cross, both running from something." Jed looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara saw understanding pass between them. 2 wounded souls, brought together by chance and circumstance, both trying to escape pasts that refused to stay buried. "Call me Jed," he said finally. "And maybe we're both done running. Maybe it's time to make a stand against the Kern brothers. There were 7 of them. How many are there now that they've done what they came to do?" "Doesn't matter how many there are." Jed's voice was quiet but certain. "They come for you. They'll have to go through me first. And I've got advantages they don't." "What advantages?" "I know this country better than any man alive. Know every trail, every hiding spot, every place the snow drifts deep and the ice runs thin. I've got time to prepare, and I've got motivation." He met her eyes. "I've got something worth protecting." Clara felt tears sting her eyes, the first she'd allowed herself to shed since the ambush. Not tears of fear or grief, but of gratitude. This stranger, this lonely old man who owed her nothing, was willing to risk everything to keep her safe. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this?" Jed was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old ghosts and older regrets. "Because 20 years ago, I had a family. A wife named Mary and a daughter named Sarah. Fever took them both in the space of a week. I was away on a scouting mission, tracking Apache raiders across the desert. By the time I got word and made it home," his voice cracked. "By the time I got home, they'd already been in the ground 3 days. He turned away, but not before Clara saw the pain etched deep in his weathered face. "I couldn't save them," he continued. "Couldn't even say goodbye. That's when I came up here to these mountains. Thought if I got far enough away from people, far enough from the world, maybe the guilt would stop following me." He looked back at her. "But then I found you, dying in my woods, and I realized maybe I'd been given a second chance. Maybe this time I could save someone." Clara understood then. She wasn't just a woman he'd rescued. She was his redemption, his chance to make peace with the ghosts that haunted him. "Then we'll face them together," she said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Jed nodded slowly. "Get your strength back first. We've got time before the storm hits, time before they could possibly track you here. Use it to heal." Then he glanced at the rifle mounted above the mantel. "Then I'll teach you how to shoot." As Clara settled back against the pillows, exhaustion pulling at her again. She felt something she hadn't felt since the ambush. Hope. Not the naive hope of youth, but something deeper and more resilient. The hope that comes from finding an unexpected ally. The hope that whispers maybe, just maybe, survival is possible after all. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, soft and silent, covering the world in white. Inside the cabin, two wounded souls began the slow work of healing, unaware that far below in the valley, men with cold eyes and colder hearts had already begun asking questions about survivors. 3 weeks into January, Jed found the tracks. He'd been checking his trapline, moving through the forest with the practiced silence of a man who'd spent decades learning the language of the wilderness. The morning had been clear and cold, the kind of cold that made your breath crystallize in the air and made the snow crunch loud as thunder underfoot. That's why he noticed them. Boot prints where there should have been none. Fresh, maybe 3 or 4 hours old, cutting across his usual path at an angle that suggested whoever made them knew exactly where they were going. Jed knelt beside the tracks, his old military training flooding back like muscle memory. One man wearing boots with a distinctive wear pattern on the left heel, walking purposefully, not wandering. Following a line that would take him, Jed stood quickly, his heart suddenly pounding, that would take him within a 1/4 mile of the cabin. He found the second set of tracks 20 yards farther on, then a third, 3 men, moving in a loose formation, staying just far enough apart that they could cover more ground but close enough to support each other if needed. Professional, organized, Kearns men. Had to be. Jed followed their trail carefully, reading the story in the snow. They'd come from the south, which meant they'd somehow made it through the pass, despite the winter conditions. That took either desperation or determination, and neither option was comforting. About a 1/2 mile from the cabin, he found where they'd stopped. Boot prints clustered together, cigarette butts ground into the snow. They'd stood here for a while, looking toward something. Jed followed their sightline, and his blood ran cold. They'd been looking at his cabin, studying it from a distance, noting the layout, the approaches, the vulnerabilities, but they hadn't attacked. Hadn't approached, just watched and moved on. Why? Jed found the answer another 100 yards north. Horse tracks, 5 of them, including the 3 he'd been following. They'd met up with 2 riders here, then all headed north together, following the ridgeline. They were scouting, gathering information, which meant they weren't sure yet if Clara was here, or they were waiting for something, someone. Jed made his way back to the cabin quickly, his mind racing through possibilities and plans. He'd taught Clara to shoot, yes, but she was still inexperienced. 3 men, maybe more, with military-grade tactics and no conscience. He needed to prepare, needed to fortify, needed to... He stopped about 50 yards from the cabin, something catching his eye. There, half hidden by a fallen tree, a spent rifle cartridge. New brass, recently fired. He picked it up, turned it over in his fingers, 44-40 caliber. Common enough, but the scratch marks on the casing told him it had been fired from a rifle with a damaged extractor. Evidence. They'd been even closer than he'd thought. Close enough to take a shot if they'd wanted to, but they hadn't, still just watching. Still waiting, Jed pocketed the cartridge and headed inside. Clara looked up from where she was kneading bread dough, her hands white with flour, a smile starting on her face. The smile died when she saw his expression. "What's wrong? We have visitors?" "Or we had them." Jed set both rifles on the table. 3 men, maybe 5 total. They'd been scouting the area, watching the cabin. Clara's face went pale, but her voice stayed steady. "The Kern brothers?" "They're men at least. Maybe more." Jed moved to the window, scanning the tree line with eyes that saw things most men would miss. "They know we're here, or they suspect it. But they're not attacking yet. Why not?" "That's what worries me." Jed turned from the window. "They're either waiting for reinforcements, or they're waiting for orders. Either way, we need to prepare. Over the next 2 days, the cabin transformed from a peaceful refuge into a fortress. Jed's military training showed itself in everything he did. He reinforced the door with extra bracing. He created firing positions at each window with pre-staged ammunition and clear sight lines. He moved supplies to strategic locations: water, food, medical supplies, weapons. Clara helped with everything, asking questions, learning, preparing. Jed taught her about fields of fire and fallback positions. He showed her how to reload under pressure, how to conserve ammunition, how to stay calm when everything inside you was screaming to panic. "If they come," he said one evening, as they worked by lamplight, "they'll try to surround us, cut off any escape routes. We have two advantages. We know this ground better than they do, and we're defending a prepared position. That counts for a lot, but we're still outnumbered. Numbers matter less than people think, especially in terrain like this." Jed spread his hand-drawn map across the table, showing Clara every detail he'd memorized over 20 years. "I know every trail within 10 miles. Every cave, every hiding spot, every place where the snow drifts deep and the ice runs thin. If we need to fall back, if we need to disappear, I can do that." Clara studied the map, tracing the lines Jed had drawn. "You've been preparing for something like this. All these years alone, you've been mapping, planning, old habits." Jed's voice was quiet. "I can't stop being a scout just because you're not in uniform anymore. Can't stop seeing terrain as either an advantage or a disadvantage. Can't stop," he paused. "Can't stop preparing for the worst." That night, neither of them slept well. Clara lay in bed, listening to the cabin settle around her, straining for any sound that didn't belong. Every crack of a branch, every gust of wind made her heart race. Around midnight, she heard Jed moving quietly through the cabin, checking the windows, adding wood to the fire. She got up and found him standing by the window, silhouetted against the moonlit snow outside. "Can't sleep either?" she asked softly. Too much thinking. He didn't turn from the window. "Running through scenarios, trying to predict what they'll do." Clara moved to stand beside him. "And what do you think they'll do?" "Depends on what they want. If they just want you dead, they'll wait for good weather and hit us hard and fast. But if they want to question you, find out what you saw, what you might have told others," he shook his head, "then they'll try to take you alive. That makes it more complicated. Which scenario are you planning for?" "All of them." Jed finally looked at her, and in the moonlight his face seemed carved from stone. "I won't let them take you, Clara, no matter what." "You understand that?" Clara understood what he wasn't saying. That if it came down to it, if capture seemed inevitable, he'd make sure they couldn't take her alive. It should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel safer than she had in weeks. "I trust you," she said simply. Something shifted in Jed's expression. "You shouldn't. I'm old and out of practice, and I've got feelings for you that are going to make me stupid when the time comes. Feelings that are going to make me take risks I shouldn't take, make choices that a good soldier wouldn't make." "What kind of feelings?" Jed was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough, almost angry. "The kind that made me spend 3 hours today thinking about how I'd burn this whole mountain down if it meant keeping you safe. The kind that make me wish I'd never found you, because at least then you'd just be dead and at peace instead of in danger because of me. The kind that—" He stopped, shook his head. "The kind that an old man has no business feeling." Clara reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough beard, the weathered skin, the tension in his jaw. "I'm glad you found me. Whatever happens, I'm glad." Jed caught her hand in his, pressed it against his cheek for just a moment. Then he gently pulled away. "Get some sleep. We've got more work to do tomorrow, and you'll need your strength." But Clara didn't move. "Jed, that ring you wear around your neck." "Mary's ring." "Do you think she'd want you to spend the rest of your life alone?" "That's not fair. Maybe not. But I think she loved you enough that she'd want you to be happy. Even if that happiness came from someone else." Jed touched the ring through his shirt, a gesture so automatic he probably didn't realize he was doing it. "Mary she was light and warmth and everything good. You remind me of her sometimes. Not in looks, but in the way you face things. The way you refuse to let fear win. Then honor her memory by living," Clara said. "By letting yourself feel something again. By taking the chance she'd want you to take." Before Jed could respond, before he could retreat behind his walls of guilt and fear, Clara stood on her toes and kissed him. It was brief, gentle, but it carried all the things she couldn't quite say. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for protecting me. Thank you for making me feel alive again." When she pulled back, Jed was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Shock, longing, fear, all three at once. "Clara, you don't have to say anything," Clara said quickly. "I just needed you to know. In case something happens. I needed you to know that you matter. That this," she gestured between them. "Whatever this is, it matters to me." Then she turned and went back to bed, leaving Jed standing by the window, one hand touching his lips, his heart pounding like he was 20 years old again. Outside, the moon sailed behind clouds and the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Somewhere in the darkness, men with cold eyes and colder hearts prepared to close their trap. But inside the cabin, two people who'd thought they were done with love, done with hope, done with everything but survival, had found something neither expected and neither could afford to lose. The war was coming. They both knew it, but at least now they knew what they were fighting for: each other. The attack came on a moonless night 3 days later, but it wasn't the attack Jed had been expecting. Clara woke to the sound of horses in the distance. Not close, maybe half a mile away, but close enough. She sat up in bed, heart pounding, and saw Jed already at the window, rifle in hand. "How many?" she whispered. "Can't tell yet. At least 3, maybe more." He didn't take his eyes from the darkness outside. "They're just sitting there, watching." Clara dressed quickly and took her position at the other window. She could see nothing but darkness and snow, but she trusted Jed's ears. If he said riders were out there, they were out there. They waited like that for an hour. 2. The night remained quiet except for the usual forest sounds. Finally, just before dawn, they heard the horses moving away, heading north along the ridge. "Psychological warfare," Jed said, lowering his rifle. "Letting us know they're out there, keeping us on edge, wearing us down." "It's working," Clara admitted. Her hands were shaking from tension and cold. Over the following days, the pattern continued. Riders appearing at odd hours, never attacking, never coming close enough to engage, just making their presence known. Clara and Jed took turns sleeping, always keeping watch, always ready. The strain showed on both of them. Dark circles under their eyes, shorter tempers, a constant tension that never quite eased. On the 5th night of this torture, Clara couldn't take it anymore. She was supposed to be sleeping, but instead she got up and joined Jed by the fire. He looked exhausted, his weathered face drawn, his shoulders slumped with fatigue. "This can't continue," Clara said. "They're going to wear us down until we're too tired to fight effectively." "I know." Jed's voice was heavy, "but I don't know what to do about it. If I go after them, I leave you alone and vulnerable. If we both go, we abandon our defensive position. If we stay—" He gestured helplessly. "We slowly fall apart." Clara sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Tell me about the ring," she said. Jed looked at her, confused by the abrupt change of subject. "What?" "Mary's ring, the one you wear around your neck. Tell me about it." "Why?" "Because I need to think about something other than fear. And you need to remember why you're fighting." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "Please." Jed was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached inside his shirt and pulled out the chain. The ring caught the firelight, a simple gold band, worn smooth with time. "I bought this with 2 months' salary," he said softly. "Army Scouts' pay wasn't much, but I saved every penny. Wanted to give Mary something beautiful, something that would last." He smiled, a sad, gentle thing. "She cried when I gave it to her. Said I was a fool for spending so much, said she would have married me with a ring made of grass if that's all I had. She loved you. She did. God knows why, but she did." Jed turned the ring over in his fingers. "I put this on her finger the day we married. It stayed there for 18 years. When she died, the doctor gave it back to me, said I might want to keep it, and you've worn it ever since." Felt like if I kept it close, she was still close, still watching over me. He looked at Clara. "Sounds foolish when I say it out loud. It sounds like love." Clara took the ring gently, examining it in the firelight. Inside the band, she could see an inscription, worn but still legible, "Forever yours." "I had that engraved after Sarah was born," Jed said. "Mary said it was redundant. She'd already promised forever when she married me. But I wanted—" His voice caught. "I wanted her to know I meant it." Clara handed the ring back, and Jed slipped it over his head again. But before he could tuck it back inside his shirt, Clara stopped him, her hand covering his. "Jed, I know you feel like you're betraying Mary by caring about me, but you're not. Love isn't finite. Having room in your heart for someone new doesn't diminish what you had with her. How do you know?" His voice was raw. "How do you know that what I'm feeling isn't just loneliness and fear dressed up as something else? Because I'm feeling it too." Clara met his eyes. "And I know what loneliness feels like. I know what fear feels like. This is different. This is—" She searched for words. "This is real. Maybe it's fast, maybe it's born from impossible circumstances, but it's real." Jed reached up and touched her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. "You deserve better than a broken old man with too much history and not enough future. Maybe I deserve to make my own choices about what I want." Clara leaned into his touch. "Maybe we both deserve a chance at happiness, even if it comes at the worst possible time." "Especially because it comes at the worst possible time," Jed said. And then he was kissing her, really kissing her this time, not the brief touch Clara had given him days before. This was deeper, desperate. A man who'd been alone for 20 years, remembering what it meant to feel connected to another human being. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jed rested his forehead against hers. "This is a terrible idea," he whispered. "The worst," Clara agreed. "If something happens to you because of me, then we'll face it together. Whatever comes, we face it together." They sat like that for a long time, holding each other in the firelight, neither speaking, just being present. Outside, the night remained quiet. The riders had gone, at least for now, but both of them knew it was just a matter of time. "Jed," Clara said finally, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "If we survive this, when we survive this, I'm not going to Portland. I'm not taking that teaching post." Jed pulled back to look at her. "What are you talking about? That's your whole plan, your whole reason for coming west." "Plans change. People change." Clara smiled. "There are children in the settlements around here who need teaching, and there's a cabin that's too big for one person, and there's a man I've—" She stopped, not quite ready for those words yet. "There's a life I could build here if you'll have me." Jed stared at her, and Clara saw hope and fear warring in his expression. "Clara, you don't have to answer now," she said quickly. "Just think about it. Think about what we could have. A life, a future, maybe even—" She didn't get to finish, because that's when they heard it. A voice calling from the darkness outside. "Jedediah Cross, I know you're in there." Jed was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Clara grabbed her weapon and took her position at the window. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "I know you've got the girl," the voice continued. It was cultured, educated, with a southern accent that might have been charming in different circumstances. "The school teacher from the wagon train. Miss Monroe, isn't it?" Clara and Jed exchanged glances. How did they know her name? "My name is Thomas Kern," the voice said, "and I believe you and I have some unfinished business, old friend." Jed's face went white, then red, then something harder than stone. "You know him," Clara whispered. "Yeah." Jed's voice was flat, dead. "I know him. We need to talk, Jedediah," Kern called. "Just talk. Send the girl out and no one gets hurt. You have my word as a gentleman." "His word means nothing," Jed said quietly. "Thomas Kern hasn't been a gentleman in 30 years. "How do you know him?" Jed looked at her, and Clara saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Not fear, not anger, guilt. "Because," he said slowly, 30 years ago, Thomas Kern and I served together. We were both Army Scouts. We were—" He swallowed hard. "We were friends." The night exploded with the sound of gunfire, and suddenly there was no more time for explanations. No more time for confessions. The war they'd been preparing for had finally arrived, and it was being led by a ghost from Jed's past who knew exactly how to hurt him. The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it had started. Clara's ears rang in the silence that followed. She looked at Jed, who remained perfectly still at his position, rifle trained on the darkness beyond the window. "Warning shots," he said quietly, "showing us what they've got, how many guns they can bring to bear." "Jed, what did he mean? How do you know Thomas Kern?" "Not now." Jed's voice was tight. "Right now, we focus on staying alive." "Jedediah!" Kern's voice rang out again, closer this time. "I'm disappointed. After all these years, not even a greeting for an old friend." "We were never friends," Jed shouted back. "Not after what you did." Kern's laughter echoed through the trees. "What I did? That's rich, coming from you. Tell me, Jedediah, have you told your pretty schoolteacher about Fort Apache, about what happened to my brother?" Clara saw Jed flinch, saw the guilt flash across his face. "That wasn't my fault, and you know it, do I? Because from where I stood, my brother died screaming your name, begging you to come back for him, but you'd already ridden away, hadn't you? Left him to the Apache because saving him was too dangerous, too risky. That's not how it happened." But even as Jed said it, Clara could hear the doubt in his voice. "I think it's time your lady friend knew the whole truth about the man she's trusting with her life." Kern called. "Shall I tell her, or will you?" Jed lowered his rifle slightly, his shoulders sagging. "Clara, tell me later," Clara said firmly. "Right now we need to focus. Don't let him get in your head. That's what he wants," but it was too late. Clara could see that Kern's words had already found their mark, reopening old wounds Jed had never quite managed to close. The night remained quiet for long minutes. Then they heard movement, not the horses but footsteps, careful and deliberate. "Someone was circling around to the west side of the cabin. They're probing our defenses," Jed said, his military training taking over despite his emotional turmoil. "Seeing how we react, where we're positioned." Clara fired a shot toward the sound, heard a curse and retreating footsteps. "They know now," she said. "Good, let them know we're not going to be easy prey." But as the hours wore on, as the psychological warfare continued, shots fired at random intervals, voices calling from different directions, the constant threat of an attack that never quite came, Clara could see Jed withdrawing into himself. Whatever history he shared with Thomas Kern, it was eating at him, distracting him when he needed to be focused. Finally, as dawn began to grey the eastern sky, the noises stopped. The riders pulled back, melting into the forest. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise had been. "They'll be back tonight," Jed said. "Or the next night. They're not in a hurry. They know we can't leave, can't get help. They can afford to wait. Then we use this time," Clara said. "We rest, we eat, we prepare. And you tell me the truth about Thomas Kern and his brother." Jed looked like he wanted to refuse, but Clara's expression made it clear she wouldn't accept no for an answer. Finally, he nodded and moved to the table, sitting down heavily. Clara joined him, pouring coffee for them both. 30 years ago, Jed began, his voice low and tired. "I was young and eager to prove myself. Best tracker in the territory, they said. Could follow a ghost across bare rock. The army loved having me on their roster." He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup, not drinking, just holding it for warmth. "Thomas Kern was another scout. Came from money back east, but he'd gone west looking for adventure. We rode together on dozens of missions. He was good, smart, capable, fearless. We became friends, or at least I thought we were friends. What happened? His brother Jackson showed up wanting to follow in Thomas's footsteps. The colonel put him on our team even though he was green, inexperienced. Thomas was supposed to look after him, teach him the ropes. But Thomas was too busy chasing glory, too busy making a name for himself." Jed finally took a sip of coffee. Grimacing at the bitter taste or the bitter memories, Clara couldn't tell which. "We got orders to track a band of Apache raiders who'd hit 3 settlements. 20 warriors, maybe more. Our team was 6 scouts. We were supposed to locate them and report back, not engage. But when we found their camp, Thomas wanted to hit them. Said we could take them by surprise, become heroes. But you disagreed. I said it was suicide. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and far from backup. Procedure was to fall back and wait for reinforcements. Thomas called me a coward, said I was afraid to take risks. Jed's hands tightened on the cup. I made the call as senior scout. We fell back, but Jackson, eager to prove himself, desperate to impress his brother, decided to go back on his own. Thought he could scout their positions, maybe steal some horses, show everyone he was brave. Clara could already see where this was going. The Apache caught him. We heard the screaming half a mile away. Thomas wanted to go back for him. I said no. It was obviously a trap. They were using Jackson as bait. If we went back, they'd kill us all. So you left him. I made the tactical decision. The right decision from a military standpoint. Jed's voice was hollow. We rode back to the fort. By the time we returned with reinforcements 3 days later, Jackson was dead. The Apache had... He stopped. It wasn't quick. It wasn't merciful. And Thomas blamed you. Thomas said I murdered his brother. Said I chose safety over honor, cowardice over courage. He tried to kill me. Would have succeeded if the colonel hadn't intervened. They discharged him from the army, sent him packing. Last I heard, he'd gone rogue, started running with criminals. Jed finally met Clara's eyes. That's who's out there, Clara. A man who's spent 30 years building up his hatred of me, blaming me for his brother's death. This isn't just about you being a witness to his crimes. This is personal. This is revenge. Clara absorbed this, trying to process what it meant for their situation. He's using me to get to you. Yeah, and I played right into his hands by saving you, by keeping you here, by... Jed's voice broke. By caring about you. He knows exactly what leverage to use now. Clara reached across the table and took Jed's hands in hers. Listen to me. What happened to Jackson Kern was not your fault. You made the right call. A hard call, but the right one. Thomas doesn't see it that way. Thomas is using his brother's death as an excuse for 30 years of criminal behavior. That's on him, not you. Clara squeezed his hands. And we're going to survive this, together. But even as she said it, Clara could see the doubt in Jed's eyes. The guilt that had been festering for 3 decades had been torn open again, and Kern knew exactly how to exploit it. They spent the day reinforcing their position, trying to rest, trying to prepare. But Clara could feel the change in Jed. He was quieter, more distant, second-guessing his decisions. The confidence he'd shown before was cracking. That afternoon, while Jed was outside securing the perimeter, Clara went to his old trunk. She needed to understand him better, needed to find something that might help pull him back from the dark place Kern's words had pushed him into. She found it beneath Sarah's doll and Mary's dress, a leather folder tied with string. Inside were papers, official military documents, commendations, mission reports. And there, near the bottom, a faded photograph. Clara pulled it out, her hands trembling. It showed 2 young men in Army Scout uniforms, standing beside their horses. One was clearly a young Jedediah Cross, taller, leaner, but with those same steel-grey eyes. The other was a handsome man with dark hair and a confident smile. Thomas Kern, she realized. Before the bitterness, before the hatred. On the back, written in faded ink, Jed and Tom fought Apache 1857, brothers in arms. Clara heard the cabin door open and quickly tucked the photograph back in the folder. But not before she'd seen something else. Another photograph beneath it, this one showing 3 men. Jed, Thomas, and a younger man, who must have been Jackson Kern. He looked barely 20, eager and innocent, unaware that he had only weeks left to live. Find what you were looking for. Jed's voice was cold. Clara turned to face him. I needed to understand. Needed to see who you were before I let a boy die, because I was too cautious. Too careful? Jed crossed to the trunk and slammed the lid shut. That's who I was, Clara, a man who made the safe choice and lived with the guilt ever since. You made the right choice. Did I? Because sometimes I wonder. Maybe if I'd been braver, faster, smarter, maybe Jackson would still be alive. Maybe Thomas wouldn't have become what he became. Maybe you'd be dead too, Clara interrupted. And Mary would have lost her husband. Sarah would have grown up without a father. You can't know how things might have turned out differently. You can only know what you did and why you did it. Jed slumped into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 63 years. He's right, though, about me. I've spent my whole life running from hard choices. Ran from the army after Mary and Sarah died. Ran to these mountains to hide from the world, even finding you. Part of me wishes I just kept riding, let nature take its course, because then at least you wouldn't be in danger because of me. Clara knelt in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. Don't you dare! Don't you dare wish you hadn't saved me? Don't you dare regret giving me a chance at life, but what kind of life? Trapped in a cabin, waiting for men with guns to a life where I'm not alone, Clara said fiercely. A life where I've found someone who matters, someone worth fighting for. A life where maybe, just maybe, I get to be happy, even if it's only for a little while. Jed pulled her close, holding her tight against his chest. Clara could feel his heart pounding, could feel the tremor in his arms. This strong, capable man was breaking apart, and she didn't know how to put him back together. He's going to use you against me, Jed whispered into her hair. He's going to make me choose. And when he does, we'll face it together, Clara repeated. Whatever he does, whatever choice has to be made, we face it together. But as night fell, and they took up their positions again, as they heard the horses returning and Thomas Kern's cultured voice calling out new taunts and threats, Clara wondered if love would be enough. If two people who'd found each other against all odds could survive when a ghost from the past had come, calling for revenge, and she wondered what she'd do if forced to choose between saving Jed and saving herself. For 2 more days, the siege continued. Thomas Kern's men circled like wolves, never quite attacking, never quite leaving. They fired shots at random intervals, shouted threats and taunts, and slowly, methodically wore down their prey's defenses. On the 3rd morning, Clara woke to find Jed already awake, sitting at the table with his old scout journal open in front of him. She'd seen him pull it from the trunk the night before, a leather-bound book filled with detailed notes from his years in the army. "What are you doing?" she asked, moving to look over his shoulder, remembering. Jed's finger traced lines on a hand-drawn map. "Thomas and I worked together for 5 years. I know how he thinks, how he operates. He's smart, patient, and he doesn't take unnecessary risks." "How does that help us?" "Because if I can predict what he'll do, I can counter it." Jed flipped to another page covered in dense writing. "He's using classic siege tactics, psychological warfare, probing attacks, waiting for us to make a mistake out of exhaustion or desperation." Clara leaned closer, studying the journal. It was filled with tactical notes, sketches of terrain, observations about tracking and strategy. This was the work of a man who'd been brilliant at his job before guilt and grief had driven him away. "You were good at this," she said softly. "I was good at killing people and not getting killed myself. Not sure that's something to be proud of. It's something that might keep us alive." Clara pulled up a chair beside him. "So what do we do? We can't stay here forever." Jed was quiet for a long moment, his weathered fingers turning pages. "We need to change the dynamic. Right now, Thomas has all the advantages, time, numbers, positioning. We're reactive, defensive. That's exactly where he wants us. So we go on offense? Not exactly. We make him think we're going to do something predictable. Then we do something he doesn't expect." Jed pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began sketching. "There's a series of caves about 3 miles north, high up in the rocks. Thomas wouldn't know about them. I found them after he left the territory. You want to move there? I want to make him think we're trapped here while we actually have an escape route." Jed's pencil moved rapidly across the paper. "We prepare supplies, stage them at key points along the route. Then when the time is right, we disappear." "But won't he just follow our tracks?" "Not if we time it right. There's a storm coming in tomorrow night. I can feel it in my bones. Heavy snow, poor visibility, perfect conditions to disappear." Clara studied his face, seeing the old soldier emerging from beneath years of rust. "You've been planning this since the first night they showed up. I've learned a few things in 20 years of living up here. This is my territory, my advantage." He met her eyes. but I need to know you can handle it. 3 miles through heavy snow, in the dark, carrying supplies. It won't be easy. I can handle it." Clara's voice was firm. "What choice do I have? You could surrender. Let me take you down to town. Turn yourself over to the marshal. It's possible that Thomas would just let us walk away, that he wouldn't. Ambush us halfway down the mountain." Clara shook her head. "No, we fight, we run, we survive, together." Jed reached out and touched her face, his calloused thumb tracing her cheekbone. "When did you become so fierce?" About the same time, a lonely old man decided I was worth saving. Clara leaned into his touch. "We're going to make it through this, Jed. I believe that. I hope you're right." But Clara could see the doubt still lingering in his eyes. The guilt Thomas Kern had reawakened, eating away at his confidence. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Jed showed Clara every detail of his plan, making her memorize the route, the fallback positions, the emergency protocols. He packed supplies in multiple small caches, food, ammunition, blankets, medical supplies, and had Clara help him move them to strategic locations. "If we get separated," he said as they worked, "you head to the caves. Don't wait for me. Don't come back for me. You get to safety. I'm not leaving you behind." Clara. "No," she grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "I've already watched everyone I cared about die or disappear. I'm not doing it again. We stay together or we don't do this at all." Jed pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Stubborn woman, stubborn man." Clara pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "Promise me. Promise we stay together." "I promise I'll do everything in my power to keep us both alive." It wasn't the promise she wanted, but Clara knew it was the best she'd get. Jed was still a soldier at heart, still trained to make the hard choices, to sacrifice himself if it meant completing the mission. She'd have to watch him carefully, make sure he didn't do anything heroically stupid. That night, as they sat by the fire, for what might be the last time in this cabin, Jed pulled out the leather folder again. He removed the photograph of himself and Thomas Kern, staring at it in the firelight. "We really were friends once," he said quietly. "Brothers, even. We saved each other's lives more times than I can count." "What happened to him?" Clara asked. "I mean, besides his brother's death. How does someone go from army scout to outlaw leader? Grief does strange things to people. Makes them bitter, makes them blame the world for their pain." Jed set the photograph down. "After they discharged him, Thomas drifted. Heard he tried prospecting for a while, then hired himself out as a guide. Somewhere along the way, he started associating with the wrong people. By the time I heard his name again, he was leading raids on mining camps. Do you think there's any part of the old Thomas left?" "I don't know. Maybe. But it doesn't matter. The man out there now, he's dangerous, driven by 30 years of hatred. Whatever friendship we had is dead and buried." Clara picked up the photograph, studying the young men frozen in time. They looked happy, confident, unaware of the tragedy that would tear them apart. "Did you ever try to reach out to him after?" "Couple times, early on. He sent back my letters unopened. Made it clear he wanted nothing to do with me." Jed stared into the fire. "Eventually I stopped trying. Figured he'd either forgive me on his own or he wouldn't. Looks like he chose wouldn't." "This isn't your fault, Jed. None of it. Tell me that when this is over, if we're both still alive to have the conversation." The next day passed in tense preparation. The storm Jed had predicted was building. Clara could see it in the way the clouds gathered, heavy and dark, in the way the wind picked up, in the way the temperature dropped. By evening, the first flakes were falling. "Tonight," Jed said, checking his rifle one final time, "we wait until full dark, until the storm is at its peak. Then we move." Clara nodded, trying to keep her hands from shaking as she prepared her pack. Everything she needed for survival was in that pack. Food, water, extra ammunition, warm clothes, medical supplies. It felt impossibly heavy, but Jed had assured her she could manage it. As darkness fell and the snow intensified, they heard movement outside. More riders arriving, voices conferring. Thomas Kern's voice rose above the others. "Tomorrow!" he called toward the cabin. "Tomorrow this ends, Jedediah. I'm done playing games." Jed didn't respond, just checked the windows one final time. Made sure everything they couldn't take was either hidden or destroyed. He didn't want to leave Thomas anything useful. At midnight, with the storm howling outside and visibility reduced to mere feet, they made their move. Jed went first, Clara following close behind, both of them wearing snowshoes, carrying their heavy packs. The cabin door closed behind them with a soft click that felt terribly final. The world was white chaos. Snow drove into Clara's face, making it hard to see, hard to breathe. But Jed moved with confidence, following paths only he could perceive. And Clara trusted him, following in his footsteps. They'd gone maybe half a mile when Clara heard it. A shout, muffled by the storm. Then a gunshot. "They found the cabin empty," Jed said, not stopping. "They'll try to track us, but the snow's covering our trail fast. Keep moving." But 10 minutes later, they heard something worse. Dogs. Tracking dogs. Their baying carrying even through the storm. Damn. Jed stopped, thinking fast. "He brought hounds. I didn't account for that. What do? We split up. You head north to the caves like we planned. I'll lead them east, away from you." "No, we promised." "Clara, listen to me." Jed grabbed her shoulders, his face barely visible through the driving snow. "Those dogs will follow our scent. If we stay together, they'll catch us both. But if I break off, draw them away, you have a chance. And what about you? I'll lose them in the rocks, then circle back. Meet you at the caves tomorrow." "Jed," he kissed her then, hard and desperate. "I love you, Clara Monroe. Should have said it before, but I'm saying it now. I love you." Tears froze on Clara's cheeks. "I love you too, which is why I'm not letting you do this alone. You have to trust me. Trust that I know what I'm doing. Trust that I'll come back to you." The baying of the dogs was getting closer. Clara could hear men's voices, could see the faint glow of torches through the snow. "Go," Jed said, pushing her gently north. "Go now before it's too late. Promise me you'll come back. Promise me this isn't goodbye." "I promise." Jed smiled, that rare, gentle smile she'd come to cherish. "I didn't survive 20 years in these mountains just to die now. Not when I finally have something to live for." Then he turned and ran east, making noise, leaving an obvious trail. Clara heard him shout, heard the dogs redirect toward him, and she ran north, toward the caves, toward safety, every step taking her farther from the man she loved. Behind her, gunshots echoed through the storm. Clara stumbled, nearly fell, forced herself to keep moving. Jed had bought her a chance. She couldn't waste it. She had to trust that he knew what he was doing, that his years of experience would keep him alive. But as she struggled through the snow, alone in the darkness, Clara couldn't shake the terrible certainty that she'd just seen Jedediah Cross for the last time, that his promise to come back was just a comforting lie, told to give her the strength to keep running, that Thomas Kern had finally gotten his revenge, and the cost would be measured in a good man's blood, spilled in the snow on a mountain that had already taken too much. The trap was simple in concept, complex in execution. Jed knew Thomas would eventually find the caves. He was too good a tracker not to. But instead of waiting to be cornered, they'd turn the cave system itself into a weapon. Over the next 2 days, while Jed's leg slowly healed, they prepared. They mapped every tunnel, every chamber, every possible exit. They set up false trails and dead ends. They cached weapons and supplies at strategic points. And they created a series of carefully placed traps, nothing fancy, just rocks positioned to create avalanches, ropes to trip unwary pursuers, narrow passages that could be easily defended by one person with a rifle. "The key is to separate them," Jed explained, sketching in his journal. "Get them spread out, make them think we're weak and panicking. Then we pick them off one at a time. How many are left?" "Best guess? 5, including Thomas. 2 went back to town for supplies last week. 1 I wounded during our escape. That leaves 5 hunting us. Still bad odds, better than 7. Jed looked up from his drawing. "And we have something they don't." "What's that?" "Motivation. They're here for revenge and money. We're here because we have no choice. That makes us dangerous. On the third day, they heard voices echoing through the caves. Thomas's men had found the entrance. Clara and Jed exchanged glances. It was time. They moved deeper into the cave system, making sure to leave obvious signs of their passage, a dropped piece of cloth here, a footprint there. They heard the men following, heard Thomas's voice directing them to spread out, search every tunnel. The first trap sprung in a narrow passage where the ceiling hung low. One of Kern's men triggered the rope Jed had strung at ankle height. Rocks cascaded down, not enough to kill, but enough to trap the man beneath them, his screams echoing through the caves. 1 down, Jed whispered. 4 to go. They kept moving deeper into the mountain, the passages growing narrower, more treacherous. Clara could hear frustration in Thomas's voice now, hear him ordering his men to be more careful. In a chamber where 3 tunnels converged, they set their second trap. Clara positioned herself in one tunnel, Jed in another, both with clear sightlines to the third. When 2 of Kern's men entered the chamber, they fired simultaneously. Both men went down. One didn't get back up. The other crawled back the way he'd come, leaving a trail of blood. 2 more, Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. She just shot a man, maybe killed him. But she couldn't think about that now. Couldn't let herself feel it yet. Now it was just Thomas Kern and one remaining man. The hunter had become the hunted, and he knew it. Jedediah. Thomas's voice echoed through the caves. Enough games. Face me like a man. Jed and Clara moved through the darkness, following a route Jed had memorized. They emerged in the largest chamber, a space perhaps 30 feet across, with a high ceiling and multiple exits. Jed had chosen this as their final battleground. Enough space to maneuver, enough light from cracks in the rock to see by. They didn't have to wait long. Thomas Kern entered from the far side, his remaining man close behind. Both had their rifles up, scanning for targets. "Hello, Thomas," Jed said, stepping out where he could be seen. Thomas's rifle swung toward him, but didn't fire. "Not yet. Jedediah. Still running, I see. Not running. Leading. There's a difference." "Is there?" Thomas moved closer, and in the dim light, Clara could finally see him clearly. He was older than the man in the photograph, his hair gone grey, his face lined with years of hard living. But his eyes were the same, cold, intelligent, merciless. "You've been leading for 30 years. Leading away from responsibility, from accountability, from you," Jed interrupted. "I've been running from you, Thomas. From your hatred, your blame, your need to make me responsible for every bad choice you've made since Jackson died. Don't you dare say his name." Thomas's voice cracked. "You have no right." "I have every right. I was there. I made the call. And it was the right call, even if it ended badly. You know it was. You've always known it. He died screaming for you. He died because he disobeyed orders, because he wanted to prove something he didn't need to prove. And yes, that's tragic. But it's not my fault, and it's not your fault, and at some point you have to stop using it as an excuse to hurt innocent people." Thomas's hands tightened on his rifle. "Innocent? That woman—" He gestured toward where he thought Clara was hiding. "That woman witnessed crimes. She's evidence. She has to live," Jed said quietly. "Because unlike Jackson, unlike Mary, unlike Sarah, unlike everyone else I've lost, I can actually save her. And I will, even if it costs me everything. Then I guess we know how this ends." Thomas raised his rifle. Clara stepped out from her hiding spot, her own rifle trained on Thomas's remaining man. "Actually," she said, her voice calm despite her racing heart, "I think you've miscalculated." Thomas's man spun toward her, and everything happened at once. Gunfire echoed through the chamber. Someone screamed, and the battle that had been building for 30 years finally reached its violent, inevitable conclusion. The gun smoke cleared slowly in the enclosed space. Clara's ears rang from the rifle reports, but she was alive, standing, unharmed. Across the chamber, Thomas Kern's last man lay still, Clara's shot having found its mark. Thomas himself was on his knees, his rifle on the ground, his hand pressed to his shoulder where Jed's bullet had struck. He was wounded but alive, his cold eyes still filled with that decades-old hatred. Jed approached slowly. his rifle trained on Thomas, his wounded leg causing him to limp slightly. "It's over, Thomas. Your men are dead or dying. The law will be looking for you." "This ends here," Thomas laughed, bitter and broken. "Does it? You think killing me solves anything? You think it erases 30 years of guilt?" "I don't feel guilty anymore," Jed said, and Clara heard truth in his voice. "I did my duty. I made the hard call. Jackson's death was tragic, but it wasn't murder. And I'm done letting you make me feel otherwise." Thomas stared at him, and something shifted in his expression. The hatred was still there, but beneath it, Clara saw something else. Exhaustion, grief, the weight of 30 years spent nursing a grudge that had eaten away everything good he might have been. "I loved him," Thomas said quietly. "My brother. He was all the family I had left. I know. And I'm sorry he died. I'm sorry I couldn't save him. But I won't apologize for keeping my men alive. That was my job. And this?" Thomas gestured at the carnage around them. "This was my job. Revenge, justice, call it what you want. This was waste," Jed said. "Waste of time, waste of life, waste of whatever friendship we once had. And for what? Did killing innocent people bring Jackson back? Did hunting me across 30 years ease your pain?" Thomas didn't answer. He didn't have to. They could all see the truth written on his face, that revenge had given him nothing but emptiness. "We're going to take you down to the marshal," Jed said. "You'll face trial for your crimes. It's more mercy than you deserve, but it's what the law requires." "The law?" Thomas laughed again. "You were never much for the law, Jed. Always making your own rules. Your own calls, maybe. But I'm trying to do better." Jed glanced at Clara, trying to be worthy of a second chance. They bound Thomas's wound and tied his hands. Then began the long journey down the mountain. It took them 2 days, moving slowly because of Jed's injured leg and the need to watch their prisoner. They buried the dead. Even Thomas's men deserved that much dignity, and Clara said a prayer over each grave, though she didn't know their names. On the second day, they met a search party coming up the mountain. The marshal from town, along with 6 deputies, had finally gotten word about the wagon train massacre and had been searching for survivors. "Miss Monroe?" The marshal, a grey-haired man with kind eyes, looked at Clara in amazement. "We thought everyone was dead. Everyone but me," Clara said quietly. "Thanks to him." She gestured at Jed. The marshal took custody of Thomas Kern, though not without expressing his gratitude. "Been trying to catch this one for years. There's a substantial reward. You both deserve it." But Clara wasn't thinking about rewards. She was thinking about the future, about what came next. They spent a week in town while statements were taken, reports filed, and justice slowly ground forward. Thomas Kern would stand trial for murder, robbery, and a dozen other crimes. He'd hang or spend the rest of his life in prison. Either way, the threat he represented was over. The townfolk treated Jed and Clara like heroes. There were dinners, speeches, more gratitude than either of them quite knew how to handle. But through it all, they remained focused on each other, on the question they'd been avoiding. What now? The answer came on a quiet morning as they stood on the porch of the boarding house where they'd been staying. Spring was coming to the territory. Clara could see it in the way the snow had begun to melt, in the way the air had lost its bitter edge. "I got a telegram from Portland," Clara said. "The school board. They're still holding that teaching position for me. That's good news." But Jed's voice was carefully neutral. "I wrote them back. Told them I wouldn't be taking it." Jed turned to look at her. "Clara, I told them I'd found a position closer to home. Teaching children in the mountain settlements out of a cabin in the high country." She met his eyes. "If the owner of said cabin will have me, you know what you're signing up for? Long winters, hard work, isolation. I know what I'm signing up for. A life with a good man, a man who saved me in more ways than one. A man I love." Jed pulled her close, and Clara felt his heart beating against hers, steady and strong. "I love you too. Have since the moment you refused to give up, refused to let fear win. So is that a yes? Will you have me? For as long as you'll stay." Jed smiled, that rare, gentle smile that transformed his weathered face. "Though I should warn you, I'm stubborn, set in my ways, and probably too old to change much." Good thing I'm patient and stubborn myself, and not looking for you to change." Clara kissed him sweet and sure. "Just looking for you to be you." They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony in town, attended by the marshal, the boarding house owner, and a few folks who'd come to care about the hermit and the schoolteacher who'd survived the impossible. Clara wore a simple blue dress. Jed wore his cleanest shirt and the same buckskins he'd been wearing when he found her in the woods. As they rode back to the cabin, their cabin now, Clara carried a new wooden sign Jed had carved. It read Cross and Monroe in neat, careful letters, and they hung it above the door as the sun set over the mountains. That night, sitting by the fire as they had so many times before, Jed pulled out his journal and wrote a final entry, "Found her dying in the woods. She saved my life in return. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone else save you." He closed the journal and set it aside, then reached for Clara's hand. She took it, feeling the calluses, the warmth, the strength that had carried them both through darkness into light. 6 months later, Clara stood at the door of their cabin, watching children from 3 different settlements arrive for their lessons. She transformed one room into a schoolhouse, with slates and books purchased with the reward money. Jed had built desks and shelves, grumbling about the noise and chaos, but smiling when he thought she wasn't looking. As the children settled in for their lessons, Clara saw Jed outside, working on something new, a cradle carved from good pine, with delicate details that showed the care he took with everything he built. Their child, the one growing inside her now, barely showing but very much real, would sleep in that cradle, would grow up in these mountains, surrounded by love and stories, and the wild beauty of a place that had almost killed them both, but had instead given them everything. That evening, after the children had gone home and dinner was finished, Clara and Jed sat on their porch, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. Clara's hand rested on her belly. Jed's hand covered hers. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Staying here instead of going to Portland? Tying yourself to an old man in the middle of nowhere?" Clara thought about the life she might have had. The schools, the society, the comfort of civilization. Then she thought about the life she had. This quiet, fierce, beautiful life, with a man who'd reminded her what it meant to be brave. "Not once," she said. "Not even for a second." Jed kissed her temple, gentle and sure. "Good, because I can't imagine doing this without you." Doing what? Living. Really living instead of just existing. They sat like that as darkness fell and the stars came out, as they had on so many nights before and would on countless nights to come. 2 people who'd found each other in the wilderness. 2 souls who'd saved each other in the ways that mattered most. Sometimes salvation comes in the form of a calloused hand extended in the wilderness. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is accept that hand and hold on tight. And sometimes, when you've lost everything and everyone you ever loved, the greatest gift life can offer is the chance to love again, to live again, to come home, at last, to a place you never knew you were searching for.